The stack, as you can tell by its name, is a linear representation of a construction history based on chaining together a number of scene nodes. It is linear in that the interface makes no provision for nodes inter-referencing each other's parameters. In the stack's case, it simply takes the existing state of the object, in most cases, and applies its effect to it. In some cases, the base object may also be modified to allow the modifier's function to be carried out. Let's have a look at the stack now and see how this linear workflow is carried out. The stack is accessed from the command panel's Modify tab, which you can see here. It's also within this area of the command panel that modifiers are applied to our objects, though this can also be achieved via the Modifiers menu on the menu bar of 3ds Max, which you can see up here. As you can see, the modifiers are subdivided into modifiers of certain types. You should note, however, that the stack window itself can only actually be accessed via this command panel here. And as you can see, it's only actually accessible via the Modifier tab. Let's quickly run through this area of the graphic user interface. As the stack is closely tied in with the modifiers, the two pretty much share the same area of the interface. At the top of the command panel, up here, is the actual name text box. As you can see, at the moment we've got a teapot selected, and we've got the name displayed here of the teapot. To the right of that area, you can see we have the wire color swatch here, and you can click on that and go into the wire color menu and actually choose a color for the teapot, for instance purple or whatever color you should decide upon. Below these two elements is the modifier list flyout window, and if you click on this button here, you can see a get a complete list of all the modifiers which you can actually apply to your object. Now down the bottom here you can actually see we have a button called configure modifier sets. That actually allows us to do a couple of things. The first thing is we can actually augment this flyout here by actually going to this option here, show buttons, and if you click on that option, it'll actually show some modifier buttons here. So as an example, we can just click on that button and it'll apply that modifier onto our stack here. If you go to the configure button, if you go to the configure modifiers button again, you can see that we've got show buttons turned on at the moment, and you can see that we have show all sets in list, which is accessible. And that will actually turn on the display of all the modifiers in this list here. If we go back again, you can see at the moment we have 3 modifiers displayed, and we can actually choose from different options here. You can see that at the moment we've actually got conversion modifiers active. Below that we've got radiosity modifiers, surface modifiers, parametric modifiers, and so on. So as an example, we could go to cache tools, or animation modifiers, selection modifiers, and so on. As you can see, you've got another option here which is configure modifier sets, and if you go in there, it actually brings up a user interface definition window where you can actually pick these sets that you actually saw here in this window. For instance, you can go to mesh editing, and at the moment you can see it's actually displaying as a total of 19 buttons. Using this spinner you can actually add more buttons, take them away, whatever, and you can see at the moment you actually have an empty button here. If you wanted to, this is mesh editing. Let's say we've got editable poly here. Let's say we wanted it again for some reason. We can just go to this list over here, grab an item, drag it onto the button and drop it, and from then on it'll actually be active. I'll just cancel that. Now I'll just turn off the buttons again. Below the flyout window is the actual stack window itself, and as you can see it's actually, you can reconfigure the size of it by grabbing this bar here and pulling it up and down. So you can pretty much make it any size that you want, really. You should also note that, as we've discussed in other DVDs in this series, you can actually grab the command panel and widen it by pulling the edge here, and you can make it any size you want, although obviously if you make it too wide it may become a little bit ridiculous. However, command panel with 2 columns is actually quite a good balance. It still leaves you quite a lot of screen space, but it does actually allow your rollout to actually expand and makes using Max a little bit easier. You can actually pull, as I said, the stack window open or close, so you can actually give yourself a bit more space if you've got a particularly large stack, displayed in here. So let's quickly run through the elements that actually make up this stack window. The first thing to note is in the actual stack window itself we have one element displayed, and that's teapot. And that's because we've actually got this teapot selected here. If I go to the create panel, and I'll just create a couple more objects, and go back to the stack again, you'll see that as I select different objects, the display in here actually changes. Obviously the name changes here, and you should note that the name displayed here is not the same as the name displayed in the actual stack window here. This name is actually giving you an idea of what the base geometry type is of that particular object. In this case it's a primitive cylinder, it's a procedural cylinder, so it actually uses the name cylinder here, teapot here, and pyramid here. But as an example, if we converted that to cylinder here to, let's say, an editable mesh, you can see now that the base object type here is editable mesh, and you can see we've got the plus button which allows us to work with the sub-elements of that editable mesh. Obviously the name has actually changed the same, it's still called cylinder. Now below that window we then have a number of buttons. We've already actually run through the configure modify sets button, so let's actually have a look at the other buttons that we have here. I'll quickly run through the names of them first, and then we'll actually run through each one in a little bit more detail later. The first button on the left we have is pin stack. Next to that is the show end result on off toggle button. Then next we have the make unique button. We have the remove modifier from stack button, and you can think of that as actually just being a delete button. And as I said, we have the configure modifier sets button on the end there. Okay, so now we have a basic idea of where the window is and what these buttons are. Let's quickly build a very basic stack and get an idea of how the workflow actually proceeds with this interface. So I'll select this teapot here, and you can see at the moment the base geometry type is a primitive teapot, and you can see we've got the parameters for that down here. The first thing I want to do is I actually want to convert the teapot into an editable poly, because I'm going to do some editing with it. So we'll do that by going to the modifier flyout. I'll go down here to this part of the menu. You can see at the moment they're basically all alphabetical. So I know that I'm going to get E pretty near the beginning. And I'm looking for edit poly. So we'll just apply that to the object. And what that actually does is, at that point, it's converted that procedural teapot into an editable poly mesh. And when it did so, you've actually got a number of new elements which have popped up here as well. Obviously we've got the name of the modifier, and you should note that the name actually isn't written in stone. It's just a label which is applied to the modifier when you first create it. And you can right click on that name, and you can see you've got the option here to rename, and you could give it a much more descriptive name if you wanted to. So I could call it Chris's modifier, or whatever I wanted to call it. And that might seem not particularly useful, but it actually is. It's very useful. If you've got certain circumstances where you where the description of the modifier is actually more important than actually what the modifier is itself, then it's obviously a very good idea to go in and actually give your modifier a name that's suitable for its function. So it's actually quite a cool feature. And if you have multiple modifiers, for instance, each of them doing a different thing, you can give yourself a clue as to what each modifier does by obviously giving them individualized names. So I'll just edit that and put that back to what it was. There we go. And you'll notice that next to the name we have a plus sign, and that actually means that this particular modifier has sub-elements. And by sub-elements I mean that it has parts that make up the object. For instance, in this case it will have vertices that make up this poly mesh, edges, polygons themselves, and then we have I think it's called boundaries, borders. There we are, it's called borders. So we've got vertices, and as you can see by opening this window we've got the list of the sub-elements, and you can see we've got vertices, we've got edges, and you'll see the edges have actually selected some and put on wireframe there.